The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. The Pool Guy Podcast Show. Yeah!
Hi, welcome to the Pool Guy Podcast Show. In this episode, I'm going to go over some common cartridge filter myths that you may have heard over the years. Cartridge filters have been around now for a couple decades in full force, but there are still a lot of myths that are out there regarding cartridge filters, and I'll dispel them here in today's podcast. Pool Service Pro. Open a Leslie's wholesale account today and receive wholesale pricing on products you use every day. Leslie's Pool Supply offers convenient locations that are open 7 days a week. Another great benefit of opening a Leslie's wholesale account is Leslie's referral program. Get referred to a customer looking for weekly pool service. Save time and money and grow your pool service route and become a Leslie's Pro. When I started a pool service way back in 1988, it feels forever ago, they had cartridge filters, but they were not really efficient or effective. In fact, I had probably 90% diatomaceous earth filters, and then a small percentage of sand filters, and maybe 1 or 2 cartridge filters. And these cartridge filters were really odd. They were in a stainless steel tank, and there was like 20 or 30 little cartridges inside there stacked together. It was a real pain to clean. I could see why no one wanted one of these filters in their backyard, and they weren't really effective in that configuration. Now, if you fast forward to 2024, cartridge filters have definitely improved. There's so many different innovations, making cartridge filters, I think, the primary choice for pool filtration. But there are still some common myths out there that I think I should dispel here so that you can feel comfortable and confident when you buy the cartridge filter and change your filter over from maybe a DE or a sand filter to a cartridge filter. The first one you hear often is that a cartridge filter will not filter down as well as a diatomaceous earth filter. Now, there's truth to this because a DE filter, if you have it running correctly, you have it charged with the right amount of diatomaceous earth on the grids, will filter down to about 3 to 5 microns, which is the best filtration in industry, hands down. No other filter type will filter that fine of a particle. But cartridge filters have gotten much better over the years, and they're rated for about 10 to 20 microns. I would say more or less near the 10 micron rating. So can you really tell a difference between a DE filter and a cartridge filter if one filters down to 3 to 5 microns and the other one filters down to about 10 microns? To me, it's a wash because you really can't tell the difference. Any micron below, let's say 40, is excellent. Sand filters will filter down to about 30 or 40 microns, and the cartridge filter is much more efficient than the sand filter, and it's also just almost as efficient as a DE filter as far as clarity and filtration. So to me, you're splitting hairs. If you really wanted to get that 3 to 5 micron, then of course go with a DE filter, but I don't think there's a huge difference going from 10 microns, let's say, to 3 microns, or 20 microns to 5 microns. To me, it's a wash, and cartridge filters are just really efficient and effective. Another myth that you hear often is cartridge filters just aren't efficient as DE filters or a sand filter. And I'm not sure where they're going with this, but I've heard many old-time pool guys say that they'll never use a cartridge filter because it's no good and they like backwashing it, and it's just not efficient not being able to backwash a cartridge filter, and they have to clean it more often than a DE filter. I would say that's kind of true in a way, but also a myth, because a cartridge filter, and I'll touch on this a little bit later, has a larger square footage than a DE filter. So technically, you're not going to be cleaning the cartridge filter as much as a DE filter if you get the right size cartridge filter, that is. And that's the important factor, I think, that kind of propagates this myth. In Florida, a lot of the pools have the single cartridge filters. And if you put in a 60 square foot DE filter, yes, you're going to clean the DE filter a lot less than cleaning a single bullet, 150 square foot cartridge filter. But here on the West Coast, we don't use those small little filters. We have larger filters. And again, I'll touch on that in a minute when I talk about the square footage and some myths regarding the square footage of the filters. But let's talk about efficiency and effectiveness. The extra square footage, in my opinion, is enough to get you by without having to clean it nearly as often as, the DE filter in a lot of cases. here in California, we use mainly the quad type 4 cartridge filters. The smallest filter that I would ever have on my pool route would be about a 320 square foot cartridge filter, which are 4 of the smaller cartridges. Typically, it's either 420, 520, or 500 square feet. Somewhere around there is a sweet spot in California. So if you had a 450 square foot cartridge filter, you're not going to be taking it apart and cleaning it every month like you would with a single cartridge filter. In fact, you can go just as long with cleaning the 4 cartridge type filter as you would with a D filter. So if you take your D filters apart every 6 months and hose off the grids, you would take the cartridge filter apart every 6 months and hose off the cartridges. So as far as that, it's not really a problem. And as far as backwashing, yes, you can't backwash a cartridge filter. With the extra square footage, you don't need to backwash the cartridge filter, in my opinion. Now, if you did live in an area where you have a lot of dirt in the pool, you may want to install a 3-way valve in front of the cartridge filter. That way you can bypass the filter. Simply put a hose on it on the discharge of the 3-way valve, and when you go to vacuum the pool, turn on the pump. First, I, of course, turn the valve to the waste mode, the 3-way valve, turn on the pump, and then you can vacuum the pool and all the dirt will bypass the filter and go into your drain. So you can easily create, quote unquote, kind of a vacuum the waste mode with the cartridge filter. Now, the old school guys would just take the top off the cartridge filter and then turn the pump on and vacuum, and all the water would just kind of run in the equipment area. Now, you can do that, but it's kind of messy. Don't recommend that. I recommend putting a valve in front of the filter if possible. If necessary, if you live in a dirt area. One thing you can do, and I think this is something that's kind of the wave of the future, and here there's a pool company called Blue Haven Pools, and every single equipment pad they're putting this on, and that's the multi-cyclone pre-filter. And this is made by Waterco, and this is a kind of an attachment. It's quite large. It looks small in the photos, but it's a pretty big attachment on the equipment. So just be careful when you're installing it that it doesn't stick up over the customer's wall on their pump. But this is a pre-filter that goes before the filter, and it uses centrifugal force. Hey, I said that correctly. And it pulls all the dirt out of the water. There's like 16 chambers, and it actually filters down fine enough that you can't even put diatomaceous earth into the skimmer because it'll filter it out. You can't put a bag of cal hypo into the skimmer because it'll filter that out of the water. And you can't put a Pool RX in, let's say, because all the minerals are filtered out. So this thing works so well that it'll eliminate 80 to 90% of the dirt before it goes into the filter. So instead of even putting a 3-way valve in front, I would just put a multi-cyclone device on your pool. And then when you go to vacuum the pool, all the dirt's going to be trapped in there. And then you clean the multi-cyclone. There's like a little waste line when you turn on the pump, and it'll actually expel the water that's inside there. So for me, the best setup would be a cartridge filter with a multi-cyclone on top of the pump, and that way you're filtering all the dirt out before it gets to the cartridge filter. You can't really use it on a D filter as well, because again, I mentioned you can't charge it because it'll filter out the diatomaceous earth, and if you wanted to put one of these on a D filter, you have to put a kind of valve in there to bypass it, so it's more complicated. They're made mainly for cartridge filters. It's an Australian company, and in Australia they have mainly sand filters and cartridge filters, and that's why they created it. But to answer the myth, it's really one of those things where if you have a small cartridge filter, yes, it's not going to be as efficient as a diatomaceous earth filter because the diatomaceous earth filter can be backwashed, and you can go about 6 months between cleaning it, and you really can't go 6 months with a single bullet or single cartridge type cartridge filter. So when you're comparing a cartridge filter, I would really suggest comparing the quad type cartridge filters. Or if you look at the Aquastar pipeline filter, it's a single cartridge filter, but it has a lot of the characteristics of a quad cartridge filter built into that single cartridge. So that's the only exception I would say would be the Aquastar pipeline filter. Mimics the 4 cartridge type filters really well, and you'll find that it filters just as good as a larger cartridge filter. But the standard cartridge filters, yes, you want to get the bigger one in order to get more efficiency. Let me touch on the square footage now, because this is another myth that I hear a lot, is that when comparing the square footage of a cartridge filter, it's really not as equal to a D filter or a sand filter, that the cartridge filter square footage is not accurate. or it's not something that you can correlate. And I would say that it's really tough to kind of get your head around the extra square footage, because when you look at a cartridge filter, you're not really looking at it correctly. And what I mean by this is that, the square footage is not actually the size of the filter, but it's actually the cartridges themselves. I'm just going to keep it simple and say you have a 420 square foot cartridge filter. So each cartridge is about 105 square feet of filtration. Now, how does each cartridge get 105 square feet of filtration? It's actually the pleats, and it's actually the depth inside the pleats. So if you look at a cartridge filter, you see the outside and you see the bands on there, and you see kind of the ridges of the cartridges facing you. But if you actually put your hand inside the cartridge filter, your finger should go in about an inch or so. And inside there, if you rub your hands, you're going to feel the cartridge material, and you're going to see where the square footage comes from. It comes from the area actually inside those gaps in between the bands and the cartridge material. And that's why each of those cartridges is 105 square feet. Put them together in a cartridge filter, and you have 420 square feet of filtration. And this is why some people are like, I don't think the cartridge filter is any bigger than my D filter, so how can it give me so much more square footage? Because if you compare a 60 square foot D filter and a 420 square foot cartridge filter, the outside tank is about the same. In fact, Pentair reuses a lot of their tanks for their quad D filters and the cartridge filter, and it looks very similar on the outside. But the inside is where the difference is. The D grids are just flat grids on the surface, and they don't have a lot of square footage. And so comparing a 60 square foot D filter to a 400 square foot cartridge filter, the cartridge filter, of course, has 7 times the filtration area of that 60 square foot D filter. Again, it has 7 times more filtration area, and that's why the quad cartridge filters can go 6 months, maybe even longer, without taking them apart and cleaning them. And so the advantage of the cartridge filter is the extra square footage created by the pleats in the cartridges. So I think it's one of those misnomers that you're looking at the filter size, you're looking at the tank, and you don't really see the extra square footage from the outside. But on the inside, you can definitely see the extra square footage. And I think it's something that in the industry, it's one of those things where you have to explain it to people. I'm going to put this filter in and it's going to give you a lot more filtration, and they'll be scratching their head being like, hey, this is the same size as my other filter. How can it give you more filtration? And then just break down everything I talked here about the cartridges themselves, and the customer will understand. You'll notice right away the flow is much better in a cartridge filter than a D filter. One thing that I think you're going to notice also, and this goes back to the efficiency of the cartridge filter, as the D filter starts to get dirty, the grids get coated with dirt on the diatomaceous earth, the efficiency of the D filter starts to go down very rapidly, and you'll notice that the pressure, the PSI, will rise in a D filter as it gets dirty. Not so in the quad type cartridge filter. And so one thing you're going to notice is that no matter how dirty it gets over time, the cartridge filter, the flow to the pool is not affected. As in a D filter, as it starts to get dirty, the flow to the pool starts to drop. You'll notice the automatic suction cleaner is not moving as fast anymore. The water's not spilling over the spa spillway as quickly. And you have to backwash the D filter, of course, to kind of increase the efficiency again. Cartridge filters generally don't have that problem. The only time you're going to run into this if you have a small cartridge filter. And again, I'm really not talking about the 100 or 150 square foot cartridge filter compared to a D filter, because I don't think you would want to invest in that. I'm a big proponent of having a bigger cartridge filter, and I don't really like the smaller 100 square foot, 200 square foot cartridge filters, except for the Aquastar pipeline cartridge filter, because I mentioned that one mimics the quad type cartridge filter. If you look at the cartridge of the Aquastar filter, the pleats the depth of the pleats are, much deeper, and you have much more square footage on just that single cartridge. Plus the design is for greater flow. So that's one exception. When you see it, it's the black filter. It says Aquastar on there. And that's the big distinction from the single bullet cartridge filters that don't have the same kind of flow and square footage that the Aquastar pipeline filter has. I just want to emphasize that, because when you look at the Aquastar pipeline filter, you may automatically in your head compare it to, the smaller cartridge filters, when you should actually be comparing it to the 420 square foot quad type cartridge filter. And Aquastar probably should pay me for saying this, because I'm really helping them out here. but they don't pay me anything for doing these podcasts. I'm just saying it because I like the filter, I like the company, and I want to make sure that this distinction is really well known out there from people that are shopping for filters. Here's another thing that I think you hear a lot is that a cartridge filter is a much more expensive filter type over time than a D filter and a sand filter. Now, to be honest with you, the sand filter is going to be the cheapest filter to operate over time. Basically, it's just a filter with sand in it, and that's it. And you backwash it every so often whenever it needs it. And there's really nothing to do with the sand filter after that. You don't take it apart and clean it. You change the sand every so often, but you can keep the sand in the sand filter sometimes for decades. I've seen sand filters go 10, 20, 30 years without changing the sand. So if you're looking at, based on pure numbers, the sand filter, of course, is going to be the most inexpensive filter to operate over the years. D filters and cartridge filters, in my opinion, actually are about the same as far as cost because you're changing out the grids just about as often as you're changing out the cartridges in the filter. And of course, the cartridge filter is going to be much more expensive than the sand filter because every 3 years you get to change out those 4 cartridges, and that'll run you about $200 plus or so or minus each time you change out those 4 cartridges. And I recommend changing out all 4 cartridges at the same time. That way the filtration is consistent. And yes, it's going to cost you $200 every 3 years. And if you go over a decade, that's going to cost you $600 roughly, plus the cost of the filter. And so yes, it is an expensive way to filter the pool. I guess if you break it down per year, it's not too bad. If you wanted to do like a sinking fund for new cartridges and you save, $50 or $60 a year, I would say, or $70 a year, I would say, then it's not super expensive to operate a cartridge filter. And if you consider that every 4 years or so you're changing out the grids in a D filter, and the grids are not much cheaper than the cartridges themselves, and so you're spending about the same. Plus you got to add DE every time you clean the filter, and that's an added expense for the D filter. So actually, in reality, I think the cartridge filter is less expensive to maintain than a D filter. And also, of course, you can't compare it to a sand filter. So it's cheaper, I think, to maintain a cartridge filter over a D filter in the long run. And I think the cartridge filter is going to just be a better experience and it's going to last longer than a D filter. In my opinion, a D filter has some wear parts like the backwash piston or the multi-port valve, whereas the cartridge filter really doesn't have any wear parts on the filter at all. It just has the cartridge inside. You take it apart to clean it. And this leads me to one of the last things I want to touch on, and that is it takes longer to clean a cartridge filter than a D filter. And in some respects, it does take longer because you have to take the cartridges out and hose them all off thoroughly to get all the dirt out from inside the pleats. And so it does take a little longer. Now, there are tools that will speed up the cartridge filter cleaning process. You have the Cyclone filter cleaning, which is a device where you put the cartridge on a bearing and then the cartridge is spinning as you're cleaning it. And this is a great way to save on your back also when you're cleaning the cartridge filter. But yeah, I would say that if you're looking at it as a pure cleaning time, D filters are faster. You just take the grids, hose them off, and put them back together. And if you know what you're doing, you should be able to do a D filter much more rapidly than a cartridge filter in some cases. But if you're using the Aquastar pipeline filter, it's just one cartridge and it takes less than 5 minutes. And so that kind of is like the winner out of all the cartridge filters as far as efficiency and also cleaning time. So yes, it takes a little bit longer to clean a cartridge filter, but I think it's easier than a D filter. If you ever taken a D filter apart, like a Pentair FNS Plus, trying to put it back together, you need like an engineering degree in some cases, or you have to call your neighbor who has an engineering degree to help you put it back together. Whereas a cartridge filter, you just take off the top manifold, take each cartridge out, hose it off, and put it back in. And it's really easy. It's one of those things where if I was, had an elderly person and they wanted to maintain their pool and they asked me what filter, I would say, of course, sand filter because you just backwash it when you need to. But if they wanted something a little more efficient, then the cartridge filter is much easier to clean and maintain than a diatomaceous earth filter. Plus, you don't have the DE kind of ghosting you for the next 3 weeks on your deck, which happens a lot when you clean a D filter. It just stays there like forever, and then the powder gets into the planters and it just stays in there forever. So the cartridge filter does have the advantage if you just take it out, hose it off, and it's pretty easy to maintain. I would say that a cartridge filter has a lot of the great qualities that, a D filter has, with some ease of cleaning. Plus, you can get just as long in between cleaning as a D filter if you get the quad type cartridge filter, not the single cartridge filter. And if you'll be happy, I think, with the cartridge filter over a D filter. And I think you'll be happy with it over a sand filter, even though it requires a little bit more maintenance than a sand filter. It just filters better, and you're going to get a better experience out of a cartridge filter than either of the other two filters, in my opinion. And that's why I'm a big fan of cartridge filters, and I sell them to all my customers. Whenever they're upgrading their filter from a D filter or a sand filter, automatically 100% go to a cartridge filter, and it's kind of my default because I just think they're efficient, effective, and all around the best filter type you can get in your backyard. If you're looking for other podcasts that I've recorded, you can find those on my website, swimmingpoollearning.com. On the banner, click on the podcast icon, and 1,300 podcasts are available to listen to, so I'm sure you'll find something there to listen to. And if you're interested in the coaching program that I offer, real quick, if you're not using pool service software, try Skimmer free for 30 days at getskimmer.com/poolguy. Again, that's getskimmer.com/poolguy. Skimmer, everything you need to run your pool service business all in one app. Pool Service Pro, open a Leslie's wholesale account today and receive wholesale pricing on products you use every day. Leslie's Pool Supply offers convenient locations that are open 7 days a week. Another great benefit of opening a Leslie's wholesale account is Leslie's referral program. Get referred to a customer looking for weekly pool service. Save time and money and grow your pool service route and become a Leslie's Pro.